So we're going to try and run this in a joint fashion. I'll make a couple of opening comments. And then the panel discussions will be happening under Barber's able chairmanship. We'll interact and I'll do a wrap-up. So education is something that crops up each year at these symposia. And each year we come away feeling that there's more that we might do. And by education, I'll use it in the broader sense of both education and outreach. If you look at life in space depends on space and the environment we put around it. Life on Earth depends on space and the environment that we have around us. And humans have a huge influence on that environment. And so the question is, when we ask ourselves, why does space, which seems to be so profound in our lives, why does it not appear in the basic curricula of school-aged children? Why is it this sort of special thing that's exciting, as we've heard from people during these last 2 days, but doesn't really become part of the core? If you add to the word space a few other nouns, like space and disasters, space and security, space and health, space and education, space and water, you're beginning to build up a picture of what we might call a sustainable world. And the sustainable world is something that humans are now affecting to a degree that hasn't been true until about 50 years ago. We shape it. We shape it by our actions. And the reason you can add the word space to all of those things that are added to the word sustainable is that it helps us in making it sustainable. Through our observations, through our GPS, through our communications, we can influence enormously the decision processes, the reactions of humans. I had a period in the United Nations where I was chairing the subcommittee, scientific and technical subcommittee of the Committee of the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space. And we really tried to, during that period, position space into what I would call the global agenda. These world summits that dealt with things like the environment. And all nations contributed, and they tried to find a medium spot where everybody could buy in. And there are always perturbations, but it's carefully coordinated. And as recently as a decade ago, the word space wasn't even mentioned in some of those reports. Now, we changed that, and we at least got a paragraph in there to use the tools of space. But I think one of our challenges as a community, we understand it, we know it, we believe it, but our challenge is to bring that sort of direct relationship between space activity and the sustainability of life on Earth to the forefront and into the education systems. Now, that's all I'd like to say at the outset. We have a lot of experts here that Barber is going to be introducing who'll be dealing with different facets. But at the end, I'd like to come back and ask you your views. Is this something that we can try and build upon across nations that will finally get space into being a core part of the curricula of schools and beyond?
Thank you, Carl. That was great. So we do have a wonderful panel of experts that, with lots of expertise and lots of passion, and they run the gamut of our education folks, all the way from young students through postgraduate level. And we've asked them to, it's really tough, we've got a large panel, and we've asked them to each take 3 minutes each, which is the biggest challenge, probably more challenging than radiation. Just teasing. So we'd like to start with Dr. Bonnie Dunbar, 5-time space flyer, and Bonnie is now at the University of Houston, where she's been for a few years. And she is the professor and director of aerospace engineering at the graduate level, and also leading the STEM Center. Bonnie.
Well, thank you very much. When I found out I was on the panel, my first inclination was to recall a quote by Einstein. Insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different outcome. And you probably wonder why I said that. I got involved in STEM, and we're used to that acronym. We think it, is pervasive out there in the community, and we think people actually know what it means. Now that I'm actually in the education community, I can say those are misconceptions to some extent. I started down this pathway in outreach. We all did. There were astronauts, NASA. We reach out, we talk about what we're doing. And then I was working for Mr. Abbey as the assistant director in charge of university research in the late 1990s, and we were getting ready to build the space station. And some of our contractors were having difficulty finding engineering graduates, clearable workforce people. And I thought that's very strange, and I was visiting with our universities in Texas, and I started hearing about the challenges in inspiring young people into engineering, and even if they came in, did they have the right coursework? So I paid a visit to the National Science Foundation, and it was about the time that they came up with the acronym STEM. It had been called other things over time. We thought it should have been science, engineering, and math, because technology was the outcome of it, but that didn't sound right, so they made it STEM. And STEM had its birth. And the Johnson Space Center didn't really have a K-12 component, but through the actions of Mr. Abbey and John Young and Greg Hayes and Mike Kincaid, and I got to tag along. We went to Austin during one of the legislative sessions, and we convinced them to fund something called the Texas Aerospace Scholars, which was a statewide program to bring juniors in engineering, or juniors in high school, to the Johnson Space Center. It's been wildly successful, continues to be funded by Austin. Well, when I left NASA in 2005, I took a position in informal education. I became the president and CEO of the Museum of Flight in Seattle. And we strengthened our programs, K through 12 and plus, and we started a similar program called the Washington Aerospace Scholars, supported by President Gregoire at that time through many different funding entities. And now the Washington Aerospace Scholars, after 9 years, has become an extremely successful program and is attracting young people into engineering. I was then approached to actually come into the formal part of education by the Dean of Engineering here at the University of Houston, and to also start a STEM center on the campus. Putting a K through 12 center on campus is relatively unique in perhaps the last 5 years or so, but 136 universities in this nation have found it necessary in order to ensure that we have a pipeline for the future. And I'd like to say that we're making a lot of progress, but we're behind. And you're exactly right on the curriculum. When I visit middle schools and high schools, I don't find space on the curriculum. When I quiz my entering freshmen, and they've been accepted in engineering, most of them don't know that we're the third planet from the sun. And so I actually start out with, do you know where you live? And I teach them some basic astronomy, because how am I going to teach them space? I'm going to talk about platforms and exploration if they don't have a grasp of the concepts. So we each do our part in reaching out and inspiring. But I've come to the conclusion that the sheer numbers alone are daunting enough that we have to have different strategies to have different outcomes. And that means we need to think on a bigger scale. We need leadership from the top that talks about engineering and science and space exploration, just like John Kennedy did, and makes it exciting. We need the media with us, including the social media. That's how our young people communicate. They don't go to the library anymore. So take a look at your websites. And I have been doing over the last week in particular, NASA, ESA, and Russia's new website, whatever you have, and say, are you answering the questions that you all asked today? Is it easy for educators to find content, or the American public? More importantly, the staffers to your legislators. You know who those staffers are? They're 23, 24-year-olds, millennials, who only deal on the web. They don't go to the library anymore. They don't read papers. Newspaper? My students don't read a newspaper. So we need to think much bigger about how we're getting to the public, and we need to think about pulling, not pushing. We all came to this, I think, this wonderful, exciting environment of space exploration because something inspired us. And I was inspired by the stars and Sputnik growing up on a cattle ranch in eastern Washington State. My family hadn't gone to college. I didn't know anybody in these fields. And so there was the pull, and I just found out, what did it take to get there? What did I need to study in school? And so I'm reminded, I'll just close with one story because we're including stories. Growing up on the cattle ranch, my dad was a really smart man, World War II veteran, high school educated, taught himself everything. He'd always say, a horse, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. But it was how he brought the cattle in that always inspired me. We had cattle drives, yes we do, eastern Washington, and rounded the cattle up. But he always liked to have me bring my friends over that morning, put them on horseback, go up in the hills, and they all had a great time. They're all from the city. They knew nothing about herding cattle. And if you've ever herd cattle, you know that you can't get in front of them. They'll go the other way. But you push them along, but you don't really push them. You give them a little space. It's called pressure, a little pressure. They see the horse, the rider, you go around. My dad would let them kind of play at that for about 4 hours, and they'd look at his watch. He's down at the corral, knew we had to get him down at the corral and separate the cows from the calves and start our business. So he'd be about 2 miles away, and he'd stand at the open gate, and he'd start calling to the cattle, and he'd hold up a piece of fresh hay. And those cows saw that hay, and they were gone. Now, all my friends thought they did that. They thought they herded those cattle down there. But they saw a goal. They saw something that was interesting, and they went as fast as they could. I feel like I do a lot of pushing, and I think we need a lot of pulling. We need the images out there. On the NASA website, there is nothing about the medical research we talked about here. I couldn't even find it. I could read you what's on the drop-downs, but do you see anything about medical research, space exploration, pictures of the astronauts on the front page? Only the Russian site had the picture of the current crew on the front page. So we need to do our job. We need to work with our legislators and help them understand what our job is and work with their staffers. I think we need a whole lot more help in pulling and not just pushing.
Thanks, Bonnie. So, a little over, but that's okay. Okay. Not for everybody else. No, just kidding. So our next insights will come from Dr. Ludmila Butterkova from the Russian Academy of Sciences Institute of Biomedical Problems, professor at Moscow State University and head of cell physiology lab for IMBP. And Dr. Butterkova, in addition to being an expert in stem cell and gravitational physiology, works with a lot of graduate students. Dr. Butterkova.
Good evening, my dear colleagues. I do not know whether I should be saddened or glad. I thought that our country was the only country that had troubles attracting young people to engineering, to space exploration, and it's great that we're talking now about these challenges. And going back to our first day of our meeting, I think that education and its notion should be on every roadmap that we develop for 5 or 10 years, short-term and long-term. And I think in general there is an idea. We know that we're talking really actively during our meetings, and thank you to the organizers of the meeting who support this idea. But I have to tell you that a lot depends on us, on people. For example, in our delegation, almost everybody, and it's a big delegation. We have not only scientists, but also educators. We're teaching in various universities and colleges, and it may not be a very big department, and not too many people, but we're trying to provide the breaking news from this field. And I would like to give you an example. For example, here in the United States, like in the majority of colleges and universities, May and June is the time of exams. And for example, for us, for the students of the Moscow State University, we came up with a seminar or a special course where we would not be talking about medical problems of our expedition to Mars. It was their goal, their task, to find this information and provide reports. And you won't believe me, but students who are going to graduate in 4 years and become medical specialists were extremely interested. And they may point out interesting and new areas. And I have to tell you that they were not reporting to us, the teachers, the educators. They were telling each other. And I hope that 1 or 2, maybe 3 people, students out of those 40, are going to someday come back to us. And 2 of those guys already came up to us, approached about writing their graduation papers. And I think that our own roadmaps should include the effort to educate and involve students. And I think the majority here understands this. The Moscow State University has a great tradition. And now it's not just one day as it used to be before. We have the Day of Science. The Moscow State University is a great large college or university that attracts scientists to speak before students, to speak before their colleagues, and it's a very interesting meeting. And the problems of space medicine are raised at such meetings regularly. And our institute is open for visitors. And of course, some scientists might get upset with their schedules being disrupted, but despite all that, we need to pay attention to students, to graduate students, postgraduate students. Plus, we also need to attract school children. And I would agree here, unfortunately, we do not have a subject in our high schools that would cover space exploration. Good teachers do bring their students to us. For example, Evgeny Alexandrovich Ilyin, who is also participating in this initiative, and we have seen the beautiful art of the children here in the foyer, was provided by different organizations. For example, the GCTC and IBMP, and you can find information on Space 2000 information RU. You can find updates and possibilities for children to send their stories, songs, and it's a very open forum and competition where children can participate. And I know my time is limited. What I wanted to say, it is in our power. You are representative of different organizational committees and seminars. I have a very serious request to you, my colleagues. I know, based on the example of Germany, think about the symposiums and meetings that would attract the young. For example, reduce the cost of participation, set up separate branches or workshops for students and the young. And Germany does that constantly, and we are very grateful. And Roscosmos, the Russian space agency, when had the opportunity to participate in such events. For example, last year we opened our doors and there were no participation fees. Students could come and listen to the leading specialists in the field of space exploration. I know that it may be a very big global effort, but taking small steps, we can achieve a lot. Thank you for your attention.
Excellent, thank you. Well, we can jump to a little more about the arts. So we're going to jump ahead. We were going to go all university level first, but we're going to skip around here. So we're going to jump next to Dr. Jancy McPhee. And Jancy is responsible for putting together the Humans in Art competition. Excuse me, the Humans in Space Art, Youth Art competition.
As the director of the Humans in Space Art, what we do is we invite people of all ages and backgrounds to learn about space and then address a question about the future of space, and they have to communicate to us with visual, literary, musical, or film artwork. Then we weave all that artwork together into displays and performances, then have the chance to educate and inspire and reach out to other people. And these are other children, but it's also the adults that look at the artwork. And so why are we using this science integrated with art approach for education and outreach? Well, there are a couple of reasons. The first is engage. So what do we have to do? We really need to first engage people before they want to get more education. And as much as we have beautiful curriculum out there, if somebody is not interested and motivated, they're not going to learn. And so we need to inspire, we need to create that pull that we were discussing earlier. We need to allow there to be a relevance for the work that we're trying to, relay to them. And we need to touch their emotions as well as their intellect. And space is a fantastic, engaging platform. So is artwork. And if what we want to teach them is STEM, we can add the arts to STEM and give STEAM to our STEM education. The second reason is that concept of training. We not only want to have an intelligent and innovative workforce, but we also want to educate the general public, and whether they identify themselves as scientists and engineers or not already. And what we want to impart is not just knowledge, but also all these higher level skills. We want these people to have their imagination and their innovation trained. We want them to be able to conceptualize things that don't exist already. We want them to be able to reason and extrapolate to the future. We want them to have the persistence sometimes it takes to do hard things that take both sides of your brain simultaneously. And then the third reason I would say to advocate for science and engineering integrated with the arts as one of our tools is this concept of communicating. So the Humans in Space Art program is an international program. And we've been talking for the last 2.5 days, or 2 days, and I'm sure again tomorrow, about this concept of international. If we want to communicate and we want to really emphasize the concept of international collaboration for our future space programs, we need to make ourselves international, but we need to start now with people who are 20 years younger than ourselves, to make them be thinking about international. We want them to see the perspectives that each other have about the future, to understand each other's priorities. We need to give them a global perspective already about the value of space and working together towards its future. We need to, and with that relevance, we're also going to get more support for our future missions. So it's not totally, a one-way kind of important idea. And then we also give them a language in which they can communicate back to us. So we talk about outreach, but what we really want is dialogue. We want to have new ideas coming in from people who are not already thinking in the same box that we are. We do get good ideas from people who do not identify themselves yet as scientists and engineers, but are genuinely interested. We know that science fiction can become reality when the idea sparks the imagination of somebody trained and experienced. So we need an accessible language that empowers people to get their ideas in and to want to learn more and get more educated. So by blending the science and the art approach, we can cross cultures, we can cross age groups, and we can cross disciplines, and we can get everybody vested and interested in learning more and becoming better educated. So that's the basic principles that I just want to lay out. And thank you so much to the Russian artwork that we have. And if you haven't seen the art out in the hallway, please enjoy it. And if you have any questions, let me know. Thank you.
Thank you, Jancy. So, along with the international theme and working with our younger students, we'd like to turn next to Dr. Francisco Fisco, with who is Executive Director of the Foundation for International Space Education and the lead for our United Space School. Francisco.
Yeah, so I was here reading these topics of this panel, and actually the foundation that I have the privilege to direct is actually the agenda and the goals of the foundation are exactly the topics on this panel. So we have a couple of programs that have proven to be very effective, but I'm not going to talk about those programs so much tonight today because we don't have much time. But I'd be happy to talk if any of you is interested later in another reception. I want to do one consideration on the international collaboration. To streamline this, I see this observing the students, and I see this like in three steps. Three basic steps. So one is basically to learn and understand each other's culture, international environment. We think we know, but in theory, different country, we approach things in different way. We study things in different way. We have our own way to see and approach a problem. And that's a part that I see in my international, I've worked in international environment. I've worked in many places in Europe and then of course here in the United States. I see that being not a big problem, especially between scientists. People tend to do that pretty quickly. Then the second step is to accept the way that other people does things in a different way. And we start to have some problem in doing that, but you can get along and probably do it. And the third step is actually share and cooperate. And that's where there's just not only willing of the people to do that, but it's also the environment that allows and lets you do that. So, of course, what really is be a big obstacle for us now are regulation, low expert control, ITAR here in the United States. But if you look at students doing those three steps, they fly through those three steps. We have 2 days to build team up with them, and the third day you see this going on in an amazing pace, and it's beautiful to see that. So, thinking education, we keep thinking education to look at the students. That's what we're trying to do, right? Trying to help students to find a way, and we're try to push them towards STEM because we really feel we need more people into the STEM studies. But we should probably start to look also at education on the other side. So probably try to educate lawmakers, regulators to really approach this problem and really to see if we really believe cooperation is the way to do things, especially in space. I think that's the only way to do it. It is probably important that aggressively we start to work on the top end of the problem. The students will be up to speed by when we resolve the problem we have. That's all I have.
Thank you, Francisco. And from there, how about Chris Barber? Would you like to speak next? And Chris joins us from the UK. And he has a wonderful international program. He's founder and director of the International Space School Education Trust. And Chris, you have a myriad of programs, but from whatever perspective you would like to bring, we'd love to hear from you.
Well, as we've got 3 minutes, I thought I'd just speak to you about 12 or 13 of them. So, just to spin out the time. I actually thought that I would speak about the role of inspiration and one of the programs that harnesses the power of people and what you do in this room to make a real difference. Out there, you can read how people become successful. They work hard, they listen to their teachers and their mentors, and for instance, anybody who's prepared to spend about 5,000 properly tutored out on something can become professional standard in almost anything. So why don't we all do it? Fear of failure. Why don't poor kids do it? Because they know there's opportunities, but they think they're for somebody else. And the people in this room can change that perception. The program that I'm going to talk about, and I'm going to talk about one program, and I'll talk about one example from it and one of the effects of it. The program, we can call it a summer school type program, but it's not limited by time of year. It involves, we ask an astronaut to be involved. We get a world-renowned scientists, of which some are space, some are biological, some are physicists, to contribute. And the young people work through a range of activities which are all designed to make them more competent and more able during the course of a week. And their theme, working in teams, where they do what we call NASA team leading, NASA team building, NASA leadership, is to come up with an idea, a design for an experiment to be carried out in space. At the end of the week, every student that's involved has to participate. If they don't join in the presentation, they don't get a mission certificate, mission completion certificate. They don't get a mission attendance certificate, you know, one that says you could catch the bus here, okay? They have to actually do and succeed. We select 1, 2, or 3 of the experiments. So coming up this month, we have 1,000 youngsters engaged in this, and we'll select between 3 and 6 of those experiments. We then have a team that we work with from King's College London, and we put the experiments together and we enable them to be flown and carried out on the International Space Station. So by the time Scott Kelly, who is actually video conferencing to one of our programs this month, comes down from space, we will have put 20-something experiments, all from high school students in different parts of the world, including one from America. We will actually, from my research, have put more experiments on the space station than everybody else in Britain, which somebody says, well, that's really good, and I think it's really shameful on our nation. And what does the program give them? It gives them people who are astronauts, people who represent the pinnacle of human achievement, tells them, you can do it. You can follow my footsteps and you can choose to do anything that you want. And then all of those young people get a genuine invitation to join in the activity at the pinnacle of human achievement by having their ideas on the space station being carried out. The youngsters that come, though, they're not empty vessels, and some of them are disturbingly clever and smart. I try and avoid them throughout the programs as much as possible, so my ignorance doesn't get exposed too much. One of the experiments that's going up this summer is on Daphnia, which I'm sure you're all really familiar with, water fleas. Water fleas, quite amazingly, this experiment was devised by 15-year-old young people from the deprived Welsh valleys, where the towns are effectively dying on their feet because there's no more mining there. So these youngsters from this poor area came up with the notion that you have water fleas who have complex DNA. They reproduce, and I don't mind saying these words, sexually and asexually. Sexually if they like the environment, asexually if they don't. So if they can survive and they can reproduce sexually in space, it actually opens up the space station to carry out complex DNA research in the future. That's the experiment. What does it do? Those young people come from a really poor place where nobody at all, not even in their town or their county or their country, thought that they would be putting something on the space station. That whole school is empowered. Their town is empowered. The leader of their council tells me, we are all ambassadors for space now. What that experiment has done is like Homer Hickam detailed in his book, Rocket Boys. So, this is the power of what you can do. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Next, Chris Stott, will you please share with us? And Chris is Chair and CEO of ManSat, also Chair of the Society of Satellite Professionals International, one of the largest funders of STEM education programs around the world. Thanks.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Carl and Barbara. Thank you, everyone, for having us here today. And just 3 minutes, briefly. Going to talk about the International Space University and also about the Conrad Foundation and some of the findings that we've been having to do with STEM, STEAM, and the International Space Station. So, the International Space University, ISU, is now 28 years old, with great thanks to many in this room. Thank you to all of the agencies that support us, all of the people who are at founding conferences, all of our alumni. And we're now at 4,000 alumni in the world, I think from over 190 different countries. And they're starting to gain momentum and have an impact, which is fantastic. And what we're seeing with these students is, A, the 3 I's, the interdisciplinary, intercultural, and international training that we give them is working well in a team environment. And what we thought was unique in STEM and STEAM, adding the arts, one of our oldest schools at ISU is actually the Humanities School, founded by Sir Arthur C. Clarke himself. What we're finding is those students are doing well in the international environment. They're inspiring others to come into the programs. But more importantly, they're doing something very interesting beyond satellite communications, beyond the space agencies. They're very involved in entrepreneurial space, starting companies together. Companies that are, to a great extent, using the International Space Station. We're seeing a real shift in why people are coming to our university. Last year we had over 3,000 applicants, and we're growing too in regards to this shift. They're coming not from the Apollo generation. They weren't inspired the same way many of us in the room were inspired, but they're coming from sustainable development. They're coming from social enterprise and entrepreneurial backgrounds, and seeking to do more in space with that. Hence, we're going to be doing a more formal announcement, but Mr. Abbey, of course, wanted to let you know that ISU is actually going to be opening a new Institute of Space Entrepreneurship here in the United States, moving away from our founding in Boston back in 1987, with our campus in Strasbourg, and our programs growing here, focusing purely on the International Space Station and entrepreneurship. At the demand of our students. That's what they're asking us to do. They're our marketplace. And that in itself pulls in a little bit with the Conrad Foundation. The Conrad Foundation aimed at high school students, 16 to 18-year-olds, named after Pete Conrad, doing the work there on entrepreneurial pursuits. Pete was a great entrepreneur. There, again, the focus has become this incredible $100 billion orbital facility, which is a magnet for STEM education, which, thanks to the great work of people in this room, thanks to companies like Nanoracks and outfits like CASIS and parts of the European Space Agency, pretty much every agency out there, is giving people access to space. For 50 or 60 years, we've talked about the possibilities of microgravity research. Now we're seeing the opportunities. And the Conrad Foundation does business plan competitions and everything from cybersecurity to nutrition to space biomed to aerospace, etc. Great program. It's been at the Johnson Space Center, NASA Ames, it's now done at Kennedy Space Center. But interestingly, it's supported by Pepsi, by American Express, by Disney. Why? Because they love the students that come through these programs. They snap them up. And what was really fascinating, I wanted to share this with you for anyone in STEM as well, is the fact that American Express have been extraordinarily good. You can use your Amex points to fund a Nanoracks experiment for STEM education on the International Space Station. We're seeing a real shift here, and those entrepreneurs are grabbing at this. And one of the great things I'd like to say too, and very briefly, finishing, but really to say thank you to everyone on this panel, because there we are at the ISU, we're postgraduate. And we see these students come up, but we see them coming from every single one of these programs. And it's tremendous. Because when you're working at the Challenger Centers, 400,000 students a year in the United States we see there, teaching them in a team environment, training. They're 12 years old. And then you see them again showing up at the Conrad Award. And then you see them again showing up at the United Space School with Francesco. It's fantastic. Then all of a sudden they're knocking on your door for a scholarship at the International Space University, and the next thing you know, you're working for them in Airbus, Boeing, Lockheed, and all these other places. It's really tremendous. So I know we have challenges in STEM. There's always going to be ways to make it better. But the pipeline is working. It's like a little treadmill, starting at the steam engine, getting there and getting there and getting there, which is fantastic. And thank you, because we're seeing them in industry now. And wow, the students who've been through STEM programs, they shine like stars. They are self-starting, they love space, and they get the job done. And I would suggest even that the future's in very good hands with some of these students coming through the programs, and thank you.
Excellent. There's a lot more of them out there globally. Excellent. So, Steve, come on up, please. I didn't realize you didn't have a seat here at the table. We're gonna have Dr. Deutsch move. You want to steal the podium? Sure. Go ahead.
Well, whatever.
Wherever you'd like.
Oh, I can just.
Steve Backwell from the Lunar Planetary Institute.
Thank you. This is an outstanding meeting, and I think it highlights the fact that that we have a great story. You know, whether it's in space. Space is inspirational. It's exciting. It draws in people of all ages. I don't think it's very safe to say that what we do across all of space exploration, is very inspirational to the community. We do reach out, and we do it moderately effectively. Could we do it better? That's certainly true. What I would say is we have a very effective program of doing exciting things and inspiring people and engaging people. The problem comes after that. My concern remains that, you know, you can engage, connect to young people and get them hearts and minds for about 30 seconds, and then the iPhone comes out and they're playing a game, they're doing something else that seems just as exciting, just as inspirational as the things they've just seen, whether it's a launch, whether it's a Mars landing, whether it's exciting things happening on station, whatever it is. So to say that we have to fix the way we connect to people, I think is a gross understatement. I think that that's only the tip of the iceberg. Could we do better? Oh yeah. If I came back and asked everybody in this room 2 years from now, what do you remember about this meeting? I guarantee that about 95% of you would remember stories, but you wouldn't remember the dry facts presented by speakers who just talk about, say, there's science. You'll remember the stories from the astronauts. You'll remember the stories of, well, experiences in farms. It's these sorts of things that capture the imagination. We can do better as a community. Scientists, engineers, we're very, very good at talking to each other. We're okay at teaching to graduate students and undergraduates. We're poorer at talking to the general public or politicians or young people, but we can help ourselves there. We can fix that. We need help there, but that's not where the problem lies. The problem lies that once we do connect to people, we let them drop because we think we've done our job. And so from my perspective, I'm sitting in a position where I'm very, very heavily involved with NASA education. And what we're finding is that the administration in this country has decided, in its infinite wisdom, that they're going to redo the education system here. And so NASA isn't anymore supposed to be reaching into the schools. All the money to do with education has been pulled out of missions. NASA is being pulled away from connecting into people and sustaining those connections, and more into publicizing events, launches, Mars landings, various things that are high profile, high impact, and quickly lost on the public, and particularly on kids. So how do you fix that problem? Well, one of the best ways to fix it is you got to grab the people, the kids in particular, after that initial connection is made. One of the best ways you can do that is to bring them into the fold. We've heard stories at this table about bringing young people in, programs to fly things on station. Internships are great. You know, we run a small internship program that we've run for many years at the institute I run, and we have 900 applicants to fill 13 seats. We need more opportunities for these kids to actually do these internships. We run the NASA internship program for across all of the NASA centers. We just onboarded 700 interns for the summer. And by the way, the system only allows us to bring in Americans. That seems wrong somehow. I can't think of any reason why we shouldn't have it open to international students to come and work within our centres. ITAR isn't really that big an issue. You can protect against that. So, you know, these are the sorts of programs I think we should be encouraging, because it's one thing to inspire. You've got to then drag them in. You've got to capture them, and then you've got to keep bringing them back. And we're in a very unique situation now, you know. We've got social media. We connect in to people, and we can hold those connections for a very long time. It's not enough just to have a kid come and do an internship. You've got to follow through. You've got to stay connected. You've got to bring them back. They go back to the university. You want them to come back and do a job at NASA or one of the companies, or go overseas and work with ESA, or, you know, somewhere else. So the whole business about STEM isn't about just the inspiration. It's what comes after that. You got to inspire and engage. You got to capture, and you got to hold them and keep them in the game. And I think that's what we have to focus on. And to do that, we need political support and political sense when it comes to not killing the corn seed that we've got for tomorrow by cutting the programs that are most important for us to sustain going forward, where we actually keep the young people engaged in STEM careers within this great opportunity, space exploration, that we have here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Steve. So that's a great segue. If we can keep them, bring them in and keep them in as we get them closer to their careers, I'd like to turn to Dr. Amanda Heckler, Director of Career Development and Outreach at NSBRI.
Well, thank you, Barbara, and good afternoon, everybody. I've tailored my comments a little bit so they're somewhat concise, but I do want to tell you a little bit about the work that NSBRI is currently doing in career development. NSBRI supports an expansive portfolio for career development and outreach that intends to inspire the next generation of scientists, engineers, and physicians. And so today I'd just like to take a few minutes to provide an example of the collaborative international work that NSBRI has undertaken in an effort to improve STEM educational opportunities. So NSBRI's First Award Fellowship Program provides an intensive, immersive laboratory experience for postdoctoral fellows in U.S. laboratories. However, in 2011, NSBRI worked collaboratively with IB&P to establish an international fellowship. So NSBRI actually welcomed 2 postdocs from the IB&P who had the opportunity to work under the direction of 2 very tenured scientists at Baylor College of Medicine and also at Rice University. It was really an exceptional experience for these 2 postdocs. They were immersed in the NSBRI culture and also within the Center for Space Medicine at Baylor College of Medicine. In more recent history, NSBRI has also supported a Japanese postdoctoral fellow who had some affiliation with JAXA and Tohoku University. So NSBRI is constantly trying to identify and really develop and nurture potential collaborations that can assist in providing enriching STEM educational opportunities for students and postdoctoral fellows. Now, one thing I didn't mention because I focused on postdoctoral fellows is our portfolio actually does span K through 12 all the way through postgraduate education. But we really believe in these collaborations. We believe these collaborations are really crucial to strengthening the STEM workforce of the future. And I think collaboration is really key to the vitality of STEM education. International partnerships not only provide the opportunity for immersion in a different culture, but it also really encourages and facilitates the exchange of ideas and practices and approaches to educating students in STEM.
Thank you, Dr. Heckler. So we have one more panelist. We hope this is inspiring some very thoughtful questions from all of you. We'd love for this to be a dialogue, but we'd like to not end the panel, but go to the next step of the panel by bridging to Andy Turnage, who is our Executive Director of our Association of Space Explorers. Andy.
Thank you, Barbara. And you all got hopefully a brief plug from Alexei this morning about the Association of Space Explorers. Maybe a little bit more than you were hoping for at the time, but Association of Space Explorers is an international professional association of flown astronauts and cosmonauts. And we have roughly 400 members in 36 different nations. To become a member of the organization, you have to have made at least one orbit of the Earth in space as a crew member in a spacecraft. I won't get any more granular than that. And as I said, we've got citizen astronaut cosmonauts in 36 different countries around the world, and we run a variety of different STEM activities, although we're not a STEM organization per se. When I listen to the discussion about STEM, I always wonder, what does that mean, and what's the desired product here? We talk about STEM education. Who are we educating and for what reason? Obviously, from a national interest, from the USA perspective, we want to have a sustainable, viable, competent future technical workforce. But when I look at it from the perspective of the industry that I'm in and that most of you are in, I want to make sure that we have competent, technically viable people designing, building, and flying rocket ships in the future as well. The problem that we have with that is that we're in competition with the rest of the world, with the Apples and the iPad makers and all of the other folks out there who are paying their engineers a lot more money than we're willing to pay them, at least in the government sector here in the United States. So we're purely at a disadvantage. We're behind the power curve, and we're probably never going to solve that problem. To a large degree, some of the commercial organizations like SpaceX and Blue Origin hopefully will begin to generate that pull, as Bonnie mentions, which is really what is needed right now. We have STEM. Let's bring STEM and roadmap together into one discussion here. STEM is a road without a map. So what we're asking kids to do is go study for 8-10 years, spend their evenings in the textbooks while their friends are out having fun. And what do we have to show them at the end of that? We don't have anything to show them. We give them promises of some bright future, that they're going to have a great job in some field that's ill-defined. But trying to ask a student to do that in advance, that's like putting, at least for me, it'd be my parents putting a big bowl of liver in front of me and saying, hey, it's good for you, you just have to suffer through it. I'm not understanding what the long-term benefits are. So we need more pull. From a national perspective, I think if, for instance, we had a nationally directed space policy with a specific direction and a map, an actual map as to where we were planning to go in the solar system, and there was some degree of confidence amongst our population and our students that that was actually going to happen, I think people would be more inspired to suffer through those years of learning math and science and technology for the not so naturally gifted or inclined, such as myself. When they see that bright future, they have the pull, okay, I'm going to be involved in this program, I'm going to be engaged. And I think there's a lot of value brought to the equation from organizations like yours and the Challenger Centers and ISU that bring together those visions and try to communicate to the younger cohort of students and future scientists and engineers that there is a real future for them out there. We have to provide them opportunities. STEM, taken from a different perspective, from the ASE perspective, is really a tool. And STEM, science, technology, well, science, engineering, mathematics, they're a common language. It doesn't matter what language you speak, Chinese, Japanese, French, Russian, it doesn't matter. If you know science, if you know mathematics, if you know engineering, you speak a common language, somebody across the world who's studying the same thing. And at ASE, we've devised a variety of programs that really try to generate that interchange amongst students around the world to get them to cooperate together and understand each other better, not just technically, but culturally and politically, so that 20, 30 years from now, those folks, the millennials, the ones that aren't biased by our sort of experiences and histories, will already know how to work together. We've spent the last 10, 15 years learning to work together with the Russians and with the Europeans and with the other partners in the International Space Station program. But what we want to do is raise that next cohort, that next generation of engineers that already knows how to work together, and they can take the next step into the solar system.
Excellent, thank you.
I'd like to follow up with the participants. We've had a couple of people say we need pull. We need pull to bring young people an interest in. Is there anybody here who feels that they have a mechanism for pull that's active, that they really can develop and share?
I have one comment. My name is Liz Warren, and I work for the International Space Station Program Science Office. And one of my roles, I'm a scientist, and I'm trying to learn to be a science communicator, is I am putting content out there. I'm luring people in. And actually, anytime, for the rest of today, I would love to hear from people. Tell me what you want to see on the NASA website. I try to put stuff out there on Twitter. I'm trying to do the social media. And I'll tell you, on an average day, if I tweet something about science, like about Scott Kelly and Mikhail Kornienko wearing, rubber pants that create vacuum, in Chibis, I'll get maybe 100 people engaged in that tweet. A couple of weeks ago, I put a picture out there of the crew watching Star Wars. It was on May the 4th, which is a big geek day. It's May the 4th be with you day. It got 11,500 people retweeting and engaging with that. So we're trying to be cool out there, but if you have ideas, I can implement them today. I'm a today kind of person. I want to make the change today.
Liz, you need to hire some 12-year-olds to run your social media.
Maybe that's a real solution.
John Allen, I'm far too old to be actually making this kind of a commentary, but I talked actually at lunchtime today on a different topic, but a similar vein in terms of how do you get the pull and not the push. And even with all the excellent programs that have been relayed here, there's still a fair amount of that push. It's put it out there and push people to go do that. But there's other areas another area I've been working in, which I won't go into, but one of the things we're contemplating, and as I say, far too old to be suggesting this, but the kind of outreach that has been done in so many other areas through, say, challenge programs and things of that, where you actually, and this sort of follows from the previous conversation, is that why aren't we going out to the 12-year-olds and asking them what it is that they want us to be doing, they want to be doing in the future? What is it they want from a program? That if you're going to be building STEM education, it gives back to the question, what does STEM really mean? A way to get the citizen engagement, not just from the space, if you will, spacefaring nations, but globally. The ones where kids have never had an opportunity to have a conversation in this before. And it's not just young children to whoever, but to have some input into that and see what kind of ideas that stimulates.
Okay, I appreciate the work that you're all doing with education. Maybe this would help and address some of the questions. We had come up with a NanoKids program here at Rice University, animating molecular nanostructures, and we tried to go through the school boards and hired a person and worked for 2 years, and it eventually touched about 40,000 kids. But then we decided to bypass that. We came up with a way where we took textbooks for 6th, 7th, and 8th grade science, which is earth science, life science, and physical science, reduced each chapter to 10 bullet points, put that to Dance Dance Revolution and Guitar Hero, and just went out on the internet with it, bypassed the school boards. It had in the first year 40,000 teacher downloads, over 1 million student downloads. So that's not just clicking on it, that's where they actually had to download the program and then play it. And then we had some assessment that showed that those that played it did far better than those that just read the lyrics. And then in the next year, again, it just snowballed from there. And Rice has now taken it and brought it for grades 2 through 5. And so now you can download the apps on iPhones and Androids. And so when there's an app and it's a familiar game, it seems to really grab them. And so the lyrics they hear are the 10 bullet points from each chapter made into a rock, pop, or rap music that gets them hearing these bullet points while they're engaged in Dance Dance Revolution.
Let's let the, you want to respond to that?
Yeah, those are all really good points. I want to go up one more level, and that is that we're still, I'm working in the K through 12 space. That's what my STEM center does, the Houston Independent School District. You know, you have to have content that's aligned with the schools and so forth. What you want to have happen is the kids to, or even their parents and teachers, to go to, for example, the NASA website and have it easily navigatable and exciting so they want more. And our NASA website right now doesn't talk about, it has no drop-down menu on this or about humans going to Mars, and it's something to go think about, because you also then want like my freshmen to pick it up and put it out on Twitter, because I've sent them to the website, get them excited. They have their own network, and then get it picked up on the news and so forth. So you're not pushing particular numbers, you got a multiplier effect, and that's really good that you're able to do that. We're trying to do that, but we're talking about a big problem. We're 100,000 engineering students below goal, 100,000. So we've got a challenge if we want to build spacecraft in the future.
Thank you. Alexander Alexandrov, Russia. Я хотел бы сказать...
Here's what I would like to comment on. Using the experience of our technical state universities in Russia, I have to tell you that we do interact with schools. We have supervision schools that we supervise, basically, starting from pre-K all the way through 12 and to university levels. We have astronomy and spaceflight philosophy as requirements. And these are the main veins that these kids are trained in. And these have been chosen by such universities as Bauman, Moscow State Universities, which is one of the centers of excellence in space field internationally. There's the Moscow Physical Engineering Institute, physical technical universities that also are participants to these school programs. And I have to tell you, for speaking of the Bauman State Technical University, we have the Youth Space Center. What is the Youth Space Center? They even have their own Mission Control Center, which actually translates into this, starting from the second year of university studies all the way through the end. They are actively involved in the space industry tasks and activities. Specifically, a task such as building student satellites, amateur satellites, or a ham radio, which in turn means that we grab a CubeSat that's equipped with the solar arrays, and we build a small radio station that gets put into that box, and then it gets delivered to the ISS. We used to do that back in the Mir days, and now we use Progress vehicles to deliver these to the ISS. And then on spacewalk, astronauts and cosmonauts launch them into space, and these satellites have at least a year-long operational life. So this program does function on our side. It does have some results that it yields. And then we have a rocket science department at one of the space centers as part of Roscosmos that uses that time to teach folks about exactly that. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I have a lot of questions. Chris.
Thank you. No, I just wanted to respond to some of the fascinating comments from the panels, from Stephen, from Bonnie, from everyone. Communication has been a common theme. The need to communicate, how we teach in schools, how we communicate, the need for space, and what Liz said too. I mean, absolutely huge. We can't ignore that. We've talked about teams, we talk about STEM, and the A in STEM and the arts in STEM, but we're very good at building things and putting them in space. You get the best experts you possibly can, the best engineers, the best scientists, the best astronauts, the best trainers. And I'll probably get shot for saying this, but they know me well. But maybe we need to fundamentally revisit communications. The European Space Agency under Dr. Juan de Olmo, I'll just say an ISU grad too, has really shifted gears recently. You've seen a totally different approach to communications. And they've done this by pulling in experts who communicate for a living, from Paris, from London, from Bonn, from Stockholm. And I would suggest that maybe one of the few things that NASA hasn't really looked at commercializing that maybe, just suggesting it could maybe take a look at, is public affairs. Not that we have something called Hollywood and Madison Avenue, just sitting there. And back when NASA was such an intrinsic part of the American economy and the American story, that came in large in part from the very first NASA administrator, the very first one, who President Eisenhower appointed, who left his job as the head of MGM Studios with a personal recommendation from a guy called Walt Disney to come in and build NASA. And how he built that was with engineers and with scientists and von Braun and the teams, but also going out to Hollywood, Madison Avenue, and pulling in people who do nothing but communicate every day. That would be the suggestion. I doubt I'd make it out of the car park, but fingers crossed.
I'll follow that point. So the last 3 years, I've been employed by the Wellcome Trust. I was made an engagement fellow for them. Wellcome Trust is the second largest non-government medical charity in the world, second only to Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. They give away £600 million a year for medical research, and they suddenly stopped and said, we give away all this money, we don't spend any money telling people why we do this research or what it's for or what the benefits are, so we're going to hire some MDs out of their normal line so they can communicate that. So I was bought out for 2 years, and I would say the point I'm going to make is that whenever we do these sessions, we talk about education, we largely talk about it as this noble but largely poorly funded thing, and it is, to be done properly, it is expensive. You know, the amount of money that the university and Wellcome have now put into me in the last 3 years, it's probably about £500,000 actually, and it, you know, that costs money. To do it properly, we've got to stop thinking about old communication forms. You're into full spectrum communication, that is television, radio, Twitter, Facebook, and whatever's coming down the road in the next 18 months that you never imagined would happen. You shouldn't see yourself in competition with Google and Apple. You will lose. If you go toe-to-toe with people who are peddling Clash of Clans, you will lose. And you've just got to see yourself as part of that thing and know how to do it. And the final thing I would say is that no one really knows how to do this. I do a lot of work for BBC now, and we sit in crisis huddle meetings with them saying, we don't know how to do this. They're BBC Two, which is the channel in which they put most of their science output, which would be your equivalent of Nat Geo Discovery here. Its average audience age just went north of 60. So it doesn't know how to get the young audience back again. So there's a lot to think about, but it does need proper resource. I mean, I think that you're actually quite close to the mark on your requirement for resource and industry in it.
Any more? Yes. Oh, go ahead while he's getting the microphone.
I'm Kelly Cowens. I'm a senior mechanical engineering student. I have one more semester at Cornell University. And I just wanted to comment on many of the things that were said. I really enjoyed, and I'm probably going to mix up who said what, but I really want to agree with what was said, I think by Steve, that inspiring, engaging is the key, because I look at students that I'm going to school with that are seniors, and they came in with a passion and a dream to do certain things, but along the way, it's kind of like the liver example, it was hard. And a lot of people discourage, they tell you it's tough, and there is a lot of people, I think there's a wrong perception out there about what the available opportunities are. So when you're starting down this career path of going into the STEM fields, going into space exploration and whatnot, there comes a point, especially with perception that is given off by what is going on at NASA, that we're a little bit stagnant in areas and things like that. So students in my class begin to start looking at other paths, and it was quite sad actually. I was talking to a group of my friends, and everyone was deciding, they were juniors, and they were deciding what they were going to go into in their career, and every single one of them, there's probably 5 or 6, said they were leaving engineering after graduation. And I thought that was so terrible and so sad, but how it made make quite a lot of sense because of the way that it's been perceived, the way that it's been handed to us. And I think that, just to reiterate that the gap, I think the biggest problem is the gap that you talked about of engaging for longer than 30 seconds. When I did Texas Aerospace Scholars, I'm actually alumni from 2010, and I can say that the students that participated in that are now either been graduated for a year, almost done, and a vast majority are involved in NASA still and in space-related fields. But along my path, I as well kind of started to falter and was like, I don't really think I want to go into this. It became very difficult. The degree was hard. And last year, though, I was able to go to Moscow, to Bauman Moscow State Technical University, and attend the international cooperation workshop with the students from all over the world. And that program reiterated my and it brought up, again, my passion to be in this industry. So I would say that that is probably your biggest problem, is keeping that gap filled, because that was 4 years in between me doing those two programs. I decided I don't really think this is for me anymore. And so I think if you're saying, yes, it costs a lot of money, because I agree, both those programs were free, and that's the only reason I did them. I would not have done them were they not funded. But I think Ludmila noted that if you get the scientists, you get the astronauts, it's all of you in the room. If you get you to give your time and give a little bit of, sure, some money to help speak to students. And when Scott Kelly just spoke at my commencement ceremony in a couple of weeks ago, and the buzz around campus was amazing, that everyone was so excited. And I think that just showed you that you can have that effect. And however, it was too late for some people. They were like, oh man, I really wish I would have looked more into something like this. And even when Charlie Bolden came and spoke in October to our campus, everyone, the huge room filled with people, and everyone was so excited. So I think those are the places where you're going to be able to make a difference, if you can get scientists and engineers and people in this field to give their time to go speak to students and have that one-on-one contact, and have students be able to see that, hey, like, this is something you can do. It is attainable. Not just being an astronaut is a far-off dream, because that's starting to be told to a lot of students, and I think you forget that when you are an astronaut. Don Pettit last night told me that his kids believe that everyone's parents are astronauts, and that is not true. So I think to be able to get out of like the Houston area bubble, that yes, there's astronauts and scientists everywhere, and realize that in Ithaca, New York, where I go to school, people don't know these people, it can make a big difference. So. Thank you. One more. Thanks.
So I think a lot of what I was going to say was actually summed up by the previous speaker, in that I hazard to say students are pretty smart, and so they look around at the time they're going into college, and at the push of parents to say, all right, what are you going to major in? What are what are your goals and dreams and so forth? And they pick sometimes randomly, sometimes with a goal or a mission or whatever. And so this is an exceptionally naive comment, but it seems to me that one might be able to, even internationally, that would be the best, have that motivational goal that we had back in the 60s, right? Where we as a planet want to go to Mars. And that then is the driver. And they look at that as sort of a constant, yes, this is where we're going. It's going to take us 30 years to get there, which means you guys, the young ones, younger than anybody in this room, has time to get a degree in that area and has time to pursue that and may be the astronaut or the support staff or the rocket designer or whatever. But it requires, if the U.S. is not going to go it alone, fine. It sounds like they have some of the same sort of STEM recruitment problems in Russia as we do here. So it's an international effort, and everybody kind of comes together and decides we need to go there, not just because we think it's cool, because that gets pushback from taxpayers, but because it will ignite a fire under the STEM field, right? If you have something like that as, wow, I could be part of that, that's a motivator that isn't just there for 30 seconds. It isn't just there for 5 minutes. It isn't just a game you download once and you forget about next month. It's there and static for a decade or 2 decades and may help fill that hole. I don't know how to get there from here, but I know there are some people in the room who work more with policymakers than I do, where such things might be conceivable, or at least start pushing the ball in that direction. And I think everybody else in the room is willing to help push that ball.
Thank you very, very much. Those are actually great closing remarks. And we wanted to thank our panelists. Thank you all so very much. Thank you all. And I think you said it beautifully. It sure can be international, and I think if we can all pull together, our challenge is to build education into each of our roadmaps and to build one roadmap together. Thanks so much.